I had gone to that barbecue every summer for 11 years. I knew how many cars fit in my parents' driveway. I knew which uncle always burned the ribs. I knew which cousins would be arguing by the third beer. I knew my spot at the long folding table, second from the left, closest to the cooler. That summer, I didn't go. My father called at 12:43 in the afternoon, right around the time the food usually hit the table. I didn't answer. My mother texted 20 minutes later. I didn't answer that either. I was sitting in a coffee shop across town, alone, with a cup of black coffee going cold in front of me. By the time they were standing in that backyard wondering where I was, the house had already been listed for sale. The divorce papers had already been filed. The DNA results were already printed, dated, and sitting in a folder on my laptop. My wife was pregnant, the baby wasn't mine, my brother was the father, and my entire family had known about it for weeks before I did. And their solution was to ask me to keep quiet and accept it as a family matter. They thought my silence meant I was still deciding. They were wrong about that. To understand why this hit the way it did, you need to understand how things were set up. I'm 34. My brother is 3 years younger. Growing up, I was the one who showed up on time, paid his own way, didn't ask for much. My brother was the charming one. He had a way of walking into a mess and walking back out without any of it sticking to him. My parents thought that was just his personality. I thought it was a pattern. Nobody ever said it out loud. 6 months before my wedding, I bought a house. Just me. My name only on the title, I hadn't married yet, and my lawyer at the time said to keep it clean. Premarital, separate property. I took his advice. We got married 4 years ago. We opened a joint account after the wedding. Over those 4 years, roughly 65% of the deposits in that account came from my paycheck. Direct deposits, documented, traceable through payroll records. I wasn't keeping score at the time. I was just working. I have one cousin who used to say, quietly, that my brother always seemed to land on someone else's feet. I didn't fully understand what he meant back then. I do now. The last year of the marriage felt different. I travel for work, not constantly but regularly. 2 overnight trips a month, sometimes more. I'd come home tired, my wife would seem fine. We weren't fighting, we weren't really connecting either, but I chalked that up to schedules. I told myself it was normal. A lot of couples go through that. What I didn't pay attention to, and I'm telling you this now so the timeline is clear, is that during most of those work trips, my wife was spending time at my parents' house. Family stuff, she'd say, dinners, helping out around the place. My brother was almost always there when she was. I have the travel records, they're not suspicious documents, just work logs I submitted to my employer, routine paperwork. But when I went back through them later, the pattern was impossible to miss. Every window I was away, every single time. I'm not telling you this to make excuses for not seeing it sooner. I'm telling you because the timeline matters, and in a few weeks that timeline was going to matter in ways I hadn't imagined yet. Looking back, every sign was there. I just hadn't thought I'd need to read them. She told me on a Tuesday evening. We were at the kitchen table. She'd made dinner, nothing special, just pasta, the kind of weeknight meal we'd had 100 times. She waited until I was done eating. Then she slid a pregnancy test across the table and said she had something to tell me. 10 weeks. I looked at the test. I looked at her. I did not say anything for a moment. Then I did the math. 10 weeks meant conception happened roughly 12 weeks ago, give or take a few days. 12 weeks ago, I was in the middle of a 2-week work trip. I have the logs, I have the hotel receipts. I was not home, She was watching my face carefully. I made sure my face gave her nothing. I said, "That's a surprise?" I meant it in a way she didn't understand. She smiled and said it was just surprise timing, that these things happen. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. I passed her the water. I said I needed some air. I went to the back porch. I stood there for a while in the dark. Inside, I was already doing the math, and the math only had one answer. Later that night, she left her phone on the kitchen counter. She went to take a shower. I walked past the counter on the way to get a glass of water. The screen was lit up. I didn't plan what happened next, I just picked it up. There was a message thread open. My brother's name. Her name. 8 months of messages. I didn't read all of it, I read enough. One message near the top of the thread, sent on a night I now recognized as one of my work trips, said, "He'll never figure it out. You're fine." I noted the timestamp, 11:47 p.m. I went to my own phone, I photographed the screen, I scrolled back to the beginning of the thread and photographed every page, dates, timestamps, all of it, moving slowly and carefully, the way you do something you know you're only going to get one shot at. Then I set her phone down exactly where I found it. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked to the bedroom. I lay down next to her when she came in. I stayed very still. I did not say anything. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I made a list. Because I had already decided that silence wasn't going to be my only answer. Consequences had to come from somewhere. I was going to make sure they came from me. 3 days after the announcement, my parents called a family dinner. Not a conversation, a dinner. Formal, set table, candles, the whole thing. I drove over alone. I didn't know what to expect. My brother was already there when I arrived. My wife was there too. They were both seated when I walked in, which told me everything I needed to know about how this meeting had been organized. We sat down. My mother served food, nobody touched it. Then my father cleared his throat and said that everyone needed to talk. What came out over the next 20 minutes was this. My parents had known about the pregnancy for at least 3 weeks before my wife told me. 3 weeks, they had known, formed an opinion, aligned with each other, and decided, as a unit, what the response should be. And that response was to bring me to a dinner table and present me with a solution. My mother spoke most. She said this was complicated, but that families figure complicated things out together. She said what mattered now was stability, for everyone involved. She looked at me carefully when she said everyone. My father said, blood is blood. My brother sat across from me and said almost nothing. He stared at the table. I noticed he didn't look up once. At no point did anyone say the words, I'm sorry. At no point did anyone ask me how I was doing. My mother looked at me across the table and said, we just want to keep this in the family. And I remember sitting very still, looking back at her and thinking, what family? That dinner was just the opening move. Over the next 7 days, I received 11 phone calls. I counted 11 from my mother, from an aunt on my father's side, from 2 cousins, and once from my brother himself. The message was different every time, but it was always the same message. Think about the baby. Think about what this does to the family. Think about your brother. Nobody called to ask what it had done to me. My mother texted on the 3rd day, you're being selfish. This baby needs stability. My aunt texted on the 5th day, you and your wife were having problems anyway. This didn't happen in a vacuum. I read every message, then I screenshotted every message. Every call I couldn't avoid, I let go to voicemail and saved the recording. I wasn't doing this out of spite, not yet. I was doing it because I had started to understand that the people around me were building a case, and I was going to need to build one too. By the end of that week, my phone contained 43 pieces of documentation I hadn't planned on having. And here is what I kept noticing. The word family appeared in almost every message. It was doing a lot of work in those texts. It was being used like a lever. Like if they said it enough times, in enough different ways, it would eventually move me. What they didn't understand was that I had already started thinking about this differently. They were counting on my presence, on me staying in the room, staying at the table, staying available to be managed. They hadn't considered what my absence would actually cost them. I had started thinking about consequences, and I was starting to understand that the most powerful thing I could do was simply disappear. A week and a half after the dinner, my brother showed up at the house. No call, no text. He just appeared at the front door on a Tuesday evening, hands in his jacket pockets, like this was something people did. I let him in. I didn't know what else to do in that moment, and I was still in the mode of not showing my hand. He said he wanted to clear the air. He apologized. It lasted about 45 seconds. He said he knew this was hard. He said he understood if I was angry. Then, and I want you to notice how fast this pivot happened, he said, but the baby's coming whether you like it or not. We need to figure out a plan. We. He used we like I was a participant in something that had been done to me. Then he suggested, with what I can only describe as genuine sincerity, that I might want to consider staying on in the house while everyone worked out the next steps. He called it our situation. He talked about logistics. He talked about what would be fair to everyone. He did not once ask what would be fair to me. I said very little. I asked if he wanted water. He said no. He talked for another 10 minutes. I listened. I did not nod. I did not argue. When he was done, I thanked him for coming by. I walked him to the door. I closed it. I stood in the hallway for a moment. He had just sat in my house, the one with my name on the title, and told me what I should do with it. He had no idea, and I had learned by then that silence was the only answer worth giving. A few days after that, my wife sat me down. She said she still loved me. She said she couldn't pretend none of this had happened. I noted that. I filed it away. I didn't say anything about the 8 months she'd spent doing exactly that. She said she'd been talking to the family about what made sense going forward. The family. Again, that word. Being used like a hand of cards. She said it might be best, for stability, for everyone involved, if we continued living in the house through the pregnancy. Just to keep things calm. She said sudden changes weren't good for anyone right now. Then she mentioned, almost as an aside, that she'd been thinking about what lawyers might say, about assets, about the arrangement of things. I looked at her. I kept my face very still. What she didn't know was that I had already spent $1,200 across 3 consultations with a lawyer of my own. What she didn't know was that every question she might think to ask, I had already asked first. What she didn't know was that the house, the one she wanted to stay in, the one that was going to provide all that stability, had never been a shared asset in any legal sense. She asked me if I'd thought about what comes next. I told her I was still processing everything. That was the only lie I told during this entire situation. I had thought about what comes next. I had thought about almost nothing else. I want to tell you exactly what I did during those 2 weeks, not to justify it, not to make myself look good, but because the distinction matters. This wasn't revenge, this was preparation, and there is a difference. I opened a folder on my laptop, I named it Household Admin, because it looked like nothing, and I needed it to look like nothing. Then I started filling it. The screenshots of my brother and my wife's message thread, all 8 months, organized by date, exported and labeled. My work travel logs, every trip, every date, every hotel confirmation, cross-referenced against the timeline of the pregnancy. 4 years of bank deposit records pulled from our financial institution's online portal, showing my paycheck hitting that joint account month after month, representing roughly 65% of everything in it. The original mortgage documents and property title, my name, only my name, dated 6 months before the wedding. And then a document I made myself. A plain text file, a timeline. Every date I knew, every fact I could confirm, every connection between them. I saved everything to the folder. I emailed a full backup to a personal account my wife had never seen. I copied everything to a USB drive and left it in my desk at the office. The folder had 47 files. I remember closing my laptop and sitting quietly for a moment. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. My lawyer and I met for the second time on a Thursday afternoon. He's a quiet man, direct. He doesn't use more words than he needs to, which I appreciated. He went through everything I had brought him, the folder, the timeline, the documents, and he said it looked solid. Then he said there was one more thing I should consider, a prenatal paternity test. Not because there was any real question about the biology, the message thread made that clear enough, but because a confirmed DNA result would create a clean legal line. No paternity, no child support obligation, no ambiguity that anyone's attorney could reach into later and use against me. He said it quietly, the way lawyers say things that are uncomfortable but necessary. I asked how it worked. He explained, a non-invasive test done through a private clinic. A blood sample from the mother wasn't even required, just a prenatal cell sample obtained through standard clinical procedure, plus a sample from me. Results in 7 to 10 business days. Cost around $400, paid privately. I scheduled the appointment the next morning. The results came back on day 9. The document was 2 pages, clinical language, a probability figure, a conclusion. I was not the biological father. I printed it, I added it to the folder, I labeled it clearly. I saved the backup. The folder now had 49 files. I closed the laptop, I made dinner. By the end of the 6th week, the folder had 51 files and I had spent $3,200 in legal fees. I did not consider that a large number. Not for what it was buying. My lawyer and I had worked through the 2 main procedural risks, the house and the joint account. Both had answers. The house was clean, purchased before the marriage, title solely in my name, no significant marital funds applied to the property in any documented way. My lawyer said it twice, slowly, so I would hear it. This is yours, unambiguously. The joint account required more care. I couldn't simply drain it. What I could do, legally, properly, in a way no one could later characterize as misconduct, was withdraw my documented contribution, the 65% that 4 years of payroll records confirmed was mine. My lawyer walked me through the exact process and the exact timing. I followed his instructions to the letter. Then I called a real estate agent. I signed the listing agreement on a Wednesday morning. She told me the house would go live on the market within the week. My wife was still living there, she didn't know. I moved into a short-term furnished apartment that same afternoon. I updated my mailing address to a P.O. box. The annual family barbecue was 3 weeks away. I was the only person in the world who understood what that meant. My absence from that barbecue was going to say everything I had chosen not to say out loud. And by the time they understood what my silence had actually been, it would be far too late. My lawyer had two concerns. He raised them both in our third meeting, sitting across from me at a small conference table with my folder open between us. He was not trying to talk me out of anything. He was doing his job, which meant making sure I understood exactly what I was walking into. The first concern was the house. Even with a premarital title, there was a narrow window of risk if my wife's attorney could demonstrate that significant marital funds had been used for property improvements or ongoing expenses. We went through 4 years of records together, line by line. There was nothing. Routine maintenance, all paid from my personal account prior to the joint account being open. He closed that folder and said it twice, the way he had before. This is yours, unambiguously. The second concern was the account withdrawal. Timing and method mattered. I couldn't move too fast or too much. He gave me a precise sequence, which institution to contact, in what order, using what documentation. I wrote it down, I followed it exactly. Then I asked him the question I had been carrying for 6 weeks. I said, if I do all of this correctly, is there anything they can do? He thought for a moment. He said, if you do this right, there's nothing they can do. I drove home, I sat at the desk in my rental apartment, and I thought about the cost of doing nothing, about staying in that house, about continuing to share a financial life with someone who had spent 8 months lying inside it, about watching my brother become a father in the space I had built. I thought about all of that. Then I picked up the folder. Shite? My mother called one more time. It was a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks before the barbecue. I almost didn't answer. But I did, because I think some part of me needed to hear what she was going to say. Needed to let it land, fully, one final time, before I closed that door. Her voice was tired, not manipulative, genuinely tired. She said my brother and my wife were struggling. She said the family was struggling. She said she understood I was hurting, but that she needed me to think about what mattered most. Then she said it. I need you to be bigger than this. I let the silence sit for a moment. I said, I understand what you're asking. That was all. I ended the call. I got in my car. I drove downtown to my lawyer's office. He was still there. I had called ahead. I sat down across from him and I told him I was ready to file. The divorce papers were submitted that afternoon. The confirmation email arrived at 4:47 p.m. I screenshotted it. I added it to the folder. The folder now had 51 files. I drove back to the apartment, I made dinner, I went to bed, and I slept, genuinely, deeply, for the first time in 6 weeks. My mother had asked me to be bigger than this. So I was. I just wasn't bigger in the direction she meant. The barbecue was 13 days away. The barbecue was on a Saturday in late July. 17 people, my parents' backyard, the long folding table with the plastic chairs. The same grill my father had been using for 20 years, my usual spot, second from the left, closest to the cooler. I was not there. At 9:14 that morning, while everyone was still getting ready to drive over, I sent an email. One email to every address in my family contact list. My parents, my brother, my wife, every aunt, uncle, and cousin who had been present for the last 6 weeks of pressure and phone calls and texts about keeping things in the family. Then I turned my phone off, drove to a coffee shop across town, and ordered a black coffee. I am told, by the one person I had quietly spoken to beforehand, my cousin, the one who had always said my brother had a way of landing on other people's feet. I'm told that at noon, my mother set a plate at my usual spot. She put a glass of iced tea next to it. She told people I was probably running late. By the second hour, they had stopped talking about the food. My cousin told me my mother texted 3 times, then called twice. Then my father called. Then my brother called. The glass of iced tea sat there, full, untouched, at my empty spot at the table. Nobody removed the plate. I think they knew, somewhere, that removing it would mean admitting what my absence already meant. My father opened the email at the table. Someone had pulled it up on their phone and passed it to him. He read it once, quietly to himself. Then someone asked what it said, and he began reading it out loud. I wrote that email carefully. No insults, no accusations framed as feelings. Just facts, in order, with documentation attached. It contained the following: a timeline, starting from the day of the pregnancy announcement, working backward through 8 months of dated messages between my brother and my wife, cross-referenced with my work travel records, confirming my absence during the relevant window. The first page of the divorce filing with the submission date and case number visible. The DNA test result, clinical language, one clear conclusion, the name and direct contact number of my attorney for any questions about the legal process, and the listing address of the house, which had been live on the market for 11 days. The email ended with one line: "There's nothing to discuss. This is just information. I am told my father stopped after the first paragraph, then kept going. I'm told my brother did not look up from the table. I'm told my wife left her chair before my father finished reading." Every aunt who had called me selfish, every cousin who had texted me about stability and sacrifice and family, they were all standing in that backyard, and they all heard it at the same time. My phone rang once while I was still at the coffee shop. I answered it, this once, this last time. My father said, "What is this?" I said, "It's information. My attorney can answer any questions about the process." He said, "Where are you?" I said, "Somewhere else." I ended the call, I turned the phone back off, I finished my coffee. There was no countermove available to them. That was the part they hadn't anticipated, not because they hadn't thought about it, but because they had assumed there would always be a conversation to have, a table to sit at, a version of me who could be managed or reasoned with or worn down. There wasn't. Every number they called was blocked as of that morning. The email had been sent from an address that accepted no replies. The house listing was publicly visible on real estate platforms to anyone who searched the address. The divorce filing was a matter of legal record. The joint account had been properly separated weeks prior, following legal counsel and documented procedure. There was nothing to pull, every door was already closed. My cousin called me that evening from his own number. He had stayed at the barbecue, he had watched the whole thing. He told me my father read the entire email without stopping a second time. He told me my brother sat very still and said nothing for a long time afterward. He told me my wife left without saying goodbye to anyone. He told me the aunts and uncles who had called me selfish, who had texted me about stability and sacrifice and family. He told me they went quiet. He said, "Nobody said a word after your dad finished reading." He paused, and nobody defended them. I thanked him. I told him I appreciated him being there. I told him that was all I needed to know. In the weeks that followed, things moved the way legal processes move, which is to say, slowly and without drama. My wife's attorney contacted my attorney. The divorce proceeded according to the filing. There was nothing to contest that hadn't already been addressed. The house was not a shared asset, the account had been properly separated, the DNA result was documented and conclusive. The whole thing was, in the legal sense, straightforward. The house sold in 38 days. Full asking price, clean title, no complications. My brother sent a handwritten letter to my P.O. box. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope. I did not open it. My mother sent a card 3 weeks later. I did not open that either. These were not acts of anger. I want to be clear about that. By the time those envelopes arrived, I was not angry. I had not been angry for a long time. I was simply absent. I had removed the condition under which they could keep reaching me. And I found when I did that the silence on my end did not feel like loss. It felt like something I had chosen, which made all of the difference. The divorce was finalized 4 months after I filed. My lawyer emailed me the confirmation. I screenshotted it. I added it to the folder. The folder had 53 files. I closed it. I have not opened it since. I got a dog not long after that, medium-sized, nothing dramatic. He takes up a reasonable amount of space in the apartment and he doesn't ask for much. I started sleeping through the night. They called it family. They used that word like it meant I had no choice, like belonging to something required me to accept anything done inside of it. But silence was never the absence of an answer. It was the answer. And I had already turned the page.